Alright, welcome back to another video everybody. So this one is a bit more of a direct follow-on from the last video that we did on the kind of general back mobility and spinal mobility exercises. So we're going to be doing this one on the saddle horse, so this is a bit more of a direct translation for the horse riders specifically, and again a couple more exercises that might be a bit familiar now, but that you can try on your horse. And I'm going to be wearing one of these visual line jackets from Equipilates, and they're really useful from my point of view as a coach, to see the kind of the lines themselves on the body, whether you're on horse or off horse. And it's also really useful for you as the rider then, if I'm taking a video or if you've got mirrors or anything like that, to be able to actually see visually what your body is doing and whether we're kind of equal or not. So we're kind of taking the intrinsic biomechanics and putting some markers on them extrinsically. So I'm going to show you a couple of the exercises that we did just in standing last time, but it translates a little bit differently and it gives you a bit more to think about if you're on a saddle horse or if you're on your actual horse. So you can be doing this on your horse, and the things I want you to think about actually are your legs. So as you're kind of sitting in your normal position, whether you're on your saddle or whether you're bareback, either way, it doesn't really matter too much. And actually this can be in some ways easier to kind of get the feel for if you're bareback initially, because you'll get a little bit more feedback from your legs actually moving, which is what I want you to pay attention to. So just sitting up on your horse, I want you to think about doing those little spine mobility exercises that we did last time in standing. So you're just going to quite simply do your little side bends. You'll probably find that you have a much smaller range of movement when you're up on your horse. So don't be alarmed by that, that's all quite normal. You've got much more stabilising work to do. So just your normal little side to side movements, and what I want you to think about or try and notice here, first of all, are your seat bones. So the two bony bits that you can feel on your saddle or down on your horse, those two bony bits in your bum, and we want them to stay level. We want them to be as equal as possible weight-wise as we're doing these side bends. And the reason for that is because your horse can feel it as well. So if you're shifting your weight around through your seat bones, that's giving potential aids to your horse or questions to your horse that they will potentially be thinking they need to answer. So sometimes that's what we want, but we also need to be able to keep the pelvis still. So the challenge here is to be able to do these little side to side movements whilst keeping the weight equal through your seat bones. And then we can choose whether or not we're putting weight down on one side of the seat or the other, or whether we're keeping everything nice and still and quiet. So that's the first thing. And then if you're doing this if you're in a saddle, just take your feet out of the stirrups initially. And I want you to do again these little side bends, thinking about the seat bones, trying to keep them level. And then I want you to notice the length of the leg. So if you feel like your one leg is getting longer, chances are the weight in your seat bones isn't going to be equal. So really try and think about keeping those seat bones level, and therefore the weight in the feet or the length of the leg should stay pretty much the same. And then you can now try that, putting your feet back in the stirrups again. And this time what I want you to think about as you're doing your little side bend, do you feel more weight going down in one foot? Because again, even if you're not quite sure in your hips whether or not your pelvis is moving, if you feel more weight down one side of the leg, think about how that's going to translate for the horse. They're all of a sudden going to be getting more weight on one side of their body. They are then going to have to counterbalance that, which we don't necessarily want. So think about these little side bends, just left to right, doesn't need to be a big range of movement, and your challenge is to keep your seat bones really, really level. Keep the weight from the hips down, really centered on the horse. And we're going to do that then with your rotation as well. Now rotation's a little bit different, you get a slightly different feel for this. It's easier to keep the seat bones level, as in left to right, but what we might be doing is actually twisting the hips, bringing one hip around with you, which again the horse is going to feel, and that's potentially, depending on what you're training, what you're working on at the moment with your horse, how you've trained your horse, that's potentially giving your horse an aid as well, intentional or otherwise. So as we're doing these little rotations, think about your hip bones, these bony bits that you can feel at the front of your hips. Keep them pointing directly forwards, don't let them twist around with you. And again, you'll get quite a clear tell, particularly if you take your feet out of the stirrups. If you kind of look down at my feet, as I'm rotating from left to right here, if I'm not concentrating on trying to keep my pelvis still, you can see my feet moving as well, my legs are moving. I'm not doing that at all, they're coming all from the hips. So what we want to try and do here to keep the legs still, to keep the hips still, is really focus in on your core and try and just rotate from the body upwards. Now, whether or not you're taking your hands around with you, obviously is going to be depending on what move you're doing with your horse or what you're trying to do with your horse, but just take the hands with you for now. It makes it a little bit more simple. So you can just practice that, going from left to right, really focusing on your legs, trying to keep your legs steady. And there's a difference, a subtle difference, from tensing up and trying to keep everything as still as you possibly can, because again, the horse is going to read into that. So we want to stay everything relaxed, nice and quiet, nice and calm and loose in the body, supple in the body, but stable. Okay, and that's all coming from your core. If the core is switching on, that's going to be stabilizing your pelvis. And if the pelvis is stable, then the legs are going to be a lot more stable. So you've got your side to side, your rotation, and then we can think about your little flexion and extension up here as well. So again, a smaller range of movement than what we'd be doing in standing, but you can just think about dropping your head forwards, dropping your chest a little bit, and you'll probably notice that it really doesn't take a lot of movement coming forwards or in any direction for you to feel this weight change, that gradual weight change in your hips. And again, if you look at my feet, the knock-on effect from a very small range of movement in my upper body down in my feet and my legs is actually quite huge. It's quite a marked range of movement there that the horse is going to feel, and then if you're, depending on what you're doing, you may get marked down on, but particularly for the horse, that's quite a big movement there in the legs that's translating just from a very, very small shift in my upper body. So again, what we need to be looking at here is the stability in the core so that we can move parts of the body and stabilize other parts of the body. In this case, stabilizing the pelvis whilst moving the upper body. So think about drawing your belly button in towards your spine a little bit without changing the position in your back. Okay, so we're not trying to tuck under and really grip in here and make everything all tight and sort of stiff. We're trying to keep the body upright, not really changing the posture, but just think about drawing the belly button in towards your spine a little bit. And then as you're doing that, you can stabilize the lower body and just ever so slightly move the upper body. And then we can come up into that extension as well, so just lifting the chest, lifting the eye line a little bit, stabilizing with your core, lowering back down, lower the head. The head's really heavy, so as soon as you move the head, we need to be stabilizing from the core a little bit. And again here, notice with your feet in the stirrups and out of the stirrups, if you can do this exercise without getting too much movement through the legs. And depending on what kind of horse you're riding at that moment in time, if you're on a very narrow horse or a very wide horse, proportionate to your body as well, it's all gonna feel quite different and it'll vary a little bit. So if you can, try it with different horses. That's always really useful. Try this in standing as well, like we did with the last video, but these saddle horses are really, really useful for it because obviously it's stable. You've not got the horse underneath you to be kind of thinking about or coming into play. So just try it, your side to side, your rotation, and then your little bit of flexion and extension. And this time what I want you to think about, now that you're on your horse or elevated off the ground a little bit, think about your legs as you're doing this. Try and stabilize your legs through stabilizing your pelvis with your core. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. Give it a try, and again, as always, feel free to leave a couple of comments and let us know how you get on with that one.